Interstate 10 stretched out before me like an endless black ribbon, cut only by the hypnotic, broken white dashes of the lane markers. I had been driving for 6 straight hours. Fatigue was no longer a feeling. It had become a state of existence. The muscles in my neck were rock hard, and my eyes burned from staring into the void ahead. The clock on the dashboard flipped to 2 a.m. It was the hour when the world seemed to hold its breath, when the worst things could happen without anyone knowing. I needed gas. The fuel needle had been hovering on the red line for the past 20 minutes. Worse, I needed caffeine if I was going to survive the night without driving into a ditch. A sign materialized from the darkness, promising a filling station 2 miles ahead. It was the kind of solitary old gas stop you find in the remotest parts of America, the ones the big brands hadn't bothered with. As I pulled in, its flickering fluorescent lights created a cold, buzzing oasis of light in the solid black desert. There were no other cars at the pumps. Only a rusted pickup truck was parked near the air compressor, looking like it had been there for decades. I turned off the engine. The silence was immediate, heavy and oppressive. There was only the low hum of the high-pressure lights and the sound of the wind whistling through the dry tumbleweeds. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air providing a slight jolt of alertness. The smell of gasoline and desert dust hit my nose. I inserted the nozzle into the tank and locked the lever to pump automatically, then walked toward the convenience store. The door chime gave a jarring clang as I entered. The interior smelled of old coffee, cheap disinfectant, and something sour, like spoiled milk. The cashier was sitting behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass, the kind that had milky scratches worn into it over time. He was gaunt, his skin wrinkled like old paper, his deep-set eyes watching me with an unnerving vigilance. I nodded a greeting, but he didn't return it, just followed my every move as I walked toward the coffee machine. The coffee was black and bitter, but it was hot, and that was all I needed. I grabbed an energy bar from a dusty shelf. When I reached the counter, the cashier was still staring. "20 on pump number 4, I said, sliding the bill and the items onto the tray under the glass. He didn't take the money immediately. His eyes flicked to the window, toward the darkness that swallowed the edges of the station's light. Then back to me. "You shouldn't be traveling alone at this hour." His voice was a dry rasp, like tires grinding on gravel. "I have to be in Denver tomorrow," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He pushed the tray back, the change resting next to the candy bar. "Lately, a lot of people don't ever make it where they're going. Missing. The cops say runaways, but I know different. They just disappear right off this road." A chill ran down my spine, not from the warning, but from the way he said it. It wasn't a threat. It was a tired acknowledgement of a brutal fact. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, taking my things. "I'll be careful." "Don't linger," he added as I turned my back. I stepped outside, the door chime clanging again. The air seemed colder than before. The old man's warning clung to my mind, making the shadows surrounding the gas station seem deeper, more menacing. That's when I saw them. 3 men. I don't know when they appeared. When I went inside, the lot had been completely empty. Now they were leaning against a dark gray sedan, parked right at the edge of the light's reach, where the darkness began its encroachment. The car's lights were off, the engine silent. They were just standing there, motionless. All 3 wore jeans and heavy jackets, the kind of nondescript clothing that made them anonymous. They weren't talking, not smoking, not looking at phones. They were just looking at me. The distance from the store to my car was perhaps 20 yards, but it felt like 2 miles. I forced myself to keep a normal pace, not wanting to show fear. The primal survival instinct in my brain was screaming, urging me to run, but my logic told me running would trigger their hunter's reflex. I heard a whisper. It was very low, blending with the wind, but clearly from their direction. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence. It was cold, calculating, not the casual banter of friends. It was the sound of a plan being finalized. As I reached my car, I glanced their way again. They had moved. They were no longer leaning on the car, but were standing upright, slightly separated, forming a loose semicircle aimed in my direction. "Calm down," I told myself. "You're just tired and paranoid. They're just travelers taking a break." I pulled the nozzle out of the gas tank. The metallic clink as I set it back on the pump was abnormally loud in the silent night. In that instant, the space shifted. The false calm broke. I heard footfalls. No longer a casual shuffle, but the hard, quick thud-thud-thud of shoe soles hitting concrete, fast and determined. I didn't dare turn my head. I dove toward the driver's side, my hand clutching the key so tightly my knuckles were white. I hit the unlock button on the fob, and a sharp bip sounded like the starting gun for a life-or-death race. They were running. I could hear their heavy breathing right behind me. I yanked the car door open, scrambled inside, and slammed it shut just as a hand slapped hard against the window glass. I saw the man's face pressed against the glass. He wasn't angry, nor was he smiling. His face was utterly blank, his wide eyes empty, reflecting only the neon light of the station. In his hand was a long iron bar, the kind used for changing tires. I frantically slammed my hand down on the central lock button. The thunk of the door bolt engaging happened simultaneously with the iron bar smashing against the passenger side window. My window was tempered glass. It didn't shatter instantly, but bloomed with a white spiderweb network of cracks. The other two men had flanked the hood of the car. One was holding what looked like a hunting knife, the blade glistening under the light. My trembling fingers fumbled the key into the ignition. The engine whined for a second before roaring to life. I didn't have time to think. I threw the gear lever into drive and stomped on the gas pedal. The car lunged forward. The man with the knife didn't get out of the way fast enough and was sent sprawling by the front bumper. I heard a dull thud as his body hit the concrete. The man with the iron bar was still gripping my door handle, trying to smash the glass again. I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the left, fishtailing the car, throwing him off. He tumbled onto the asphalt but immediately scrambled to his feet. I tore out of the gas station, tires screeching on the blacktop as I accelerated onto the darkness of the highway. I looked in the rearview mirror. 3 figures stood in the lonely halo of the gas station, shrinking until they vanished into the night. They weren't following. They knew they had failed this time. I drove like a maniac for the next hour, not daring to slow down even slightly. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely keep the steering wheel steady. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to break through. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a small town ahead that I allowed myself to breathe. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner where several long-haul trucks were parked. Light and the presence of people had never felt so safe. I took out my phone, my fingers still uncontrollably trembling as I dialed 911, Wevan. "What is your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice came over the line. "I've just been attacked," I said, my voice cracking, sounding alien to my own ears. "At a gas station about 60 miles east of here on Interstate 10. There were 3 men. They had weapons." I recounted everything, trying to provide every tiny detail I could remember. The gray sedan, the iron bar, the hunting knife, the blank face of the man who hit the glass. The police said they would send someone to check the location, and a unit to my location to take my statement. After hanging up, I sat there in the car with the shattered passenger window, staring at the cracks. If I had been a few seconds slower, I didn't know what horrors would have followed. I wondered how many people hadn't been as lucky as I was. How many had stopped at that oasis of light, thinking they were safe, only to be swallowed by the darkness. I had escaped, but as I looked in the rearview mirror into the inky blackness behind me, I knew the road was still long, and the darkness was always hungry. Everyone assumes the Nevada desert is silent. They are wrong. True silence is a tangible thing. It presses in on your ears. That's the silence I felt on the night shift at Scorpion Bend Gas. The place is a lonely island of light on a dark sea of rock and sagebrush. Highway 95 is a black ribbon that stretches north to Tonopah. I am Alex, and this is my dominion. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. tonight was different. A dry cold, not the usual November kind, had seeped in. It made the air thin and sharp. I had the old electric space heater under the counter humming pointlessly. I was drawing. I always draw on the shift. Tonight, it was a scorpion, fitting the place's name, sketched in ballpoint on a receipt pad. The small details kept my mind focused. 10 o'clock drifted past. An 18-wheeler rumbled in, stopping just long enough for the grizzled driver to buy 2 black coffees and a pack of gum. He said nothing, just nodded. 11:30. A family in a minivan looking like they'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. The wife asked for directions to Beatty, her voice shaking with fatigue. I pointed them the way, watching them drive off with a strange pang of envy. They were going somewhere. I was staying. Midnight came and went. The air grew thick. Then around 1 a.m. the phone on the counter rang. Its shrill plastic cry cut through the stillness. I picked it up. Scorpion Bend gas, nothing. Just a gap of silence. I was about to hang up when I heard it. An intake of breath. Dry. Then an exhale, slow, right against the mouthpiece, as if someone were trying to taste the air through the line. "Hello," I said again, my voice a little harder. The breathing stopped. A click. They had hung up. I shrugged. Prank calls weren't uncommon out here, but it left a nasty aftertaste. I returned to my sketch, but the Scorpion's lines now looked menacing. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I didn't say anything this time. I just picked it up and listened. The breathing was there again, steady, in, out, an almost mechanical rhythm. This time I was the one who hung up first. My heart was beating a little faster. I walked to the plate glass front door and threw the deadbolt. It was a pointless gesture. Anyone who wanted in could smash the glass. But it made me feel in control. I returned to the counter, and the phone rang a third time. I stared at it. The ringing bored into my temples. I let it ring. 5 times. 10 times. Finally it stopped, leaving a more unsettling silence in its wake. I looked out the window, past the brightly lit pumps. The road was pitch black, and that's when it came. An RV, an old Winnebago. Maybe from the 80s with peeling beige paint. It didn't pull up to the pumps. Instead, it took a wide turn, heading toward the edge of the asphalt lot, to the darkest area where the awning light barely reached. Security camera number 3, the one that always failed, was aimed that way. The engine died. The headlights went off. It just sat there, a silent rectangle in the gloom. The silence in the store now seemed charged with electricity. I could hear the hum of the soda cooler, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, and my own breathing. I strained to see into the RV. Its windows were too dark, too far away. Maybe it was a tired traveler, just catching a few hours of sleep. It made sense. I picked up the store phone. No dial tone. That happens sometimes. The weather, or just the vagaries of the desert. I pulled out my cell phone, 1 bar. I dialed the store manager. The call connected, but the attendant's voice was garbled, just snippets of static. The line beeped. I looked at the phone. No service. I sat behind the counter, but I couldn't sit still. I got up, walking the aisles, straightening chip bags, wiping a non-existent smudge off the glass cabinet door. My eyes kept darting toward the window, toward that beige block. It was still there, motionless. It was almost 2:30 a.m. I decided I was being paranoid. It was just a camper. The calls were a coincidence. And then the lights in the store went out, not a flicker. A sudden, definitive drop. The store plunged into absolute darkness. The hum of the cooler ceased. The buzz of the lights was gone. The silence I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. I was frozen in place for a second. Then the backup system kicked in. A small pop from the utility room in the back, and a few red security bulbs snapped on, bathing everything in an eerie, sickly light. The coolers were still off. The register was dead, but I could see, and the first thing I saw was the RV. It was still there, unchanged. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I backed up, moving out of the dim red light, pressing myself into the corner behind the counter. There was an aluminum baseball bat I kept there. I grabbed it. The feel of the cold metal was comforting, but it didn't stop my hand from shaking. I listened, and I heard it. Not at the front door, but the back, the stockroom door, where I stacked the boxes. A sturdy steel door, a metal scraping sound. Slow, deliberate, like someone was testing the lock with something. I held my breath. The scraping stopped. A heavy thud, as if someone had shouldered the door. Then silence again. I stood there, bat raised, and then the entire gas station was flooded with light. I cried out, a strangled sound, and raised my hands to cover my eyes. It was a blinding, stark white light, turning the red store into a brilliant stage. Through my fingers, I realized it was the RV's headlights. They had turned them on. High beams, pointed directly at the gas station's front door. They turned the glass into a massive mirror, reflecting the store's chaotic interior. I heard the back door pop open, a jarring metallic screech of metal being forced, then footsteps. They weren't hurried, not a run, just heavy, purposeful boot falls on the stockroom floor. The steps stopped, then continued, moving into the main store area. I crouched, making myself as small as possible. I was in the shadow of the counter, but the light from the headlights still cast weird angles. I could see the shadow of the person. It was tall, very tall. The shadow didn't move toward the register. He walked straight toward the counter. He stopped a few steps from where I was hiding. I could smell him, a mix of engine oil and cheap soap. He stood there. His shadow loomed over me. He pulled a long-barreled revolver from inside his jacket. He didn't say a word, just the click-clack of him cocking the hammer. Then he aimed the gun at me. I flinched in terror. There was no hesitation in his eyes, just a cold, vacant stare. "Open the safe," he said, his voice husky and dry. "All of it." My hands shaking, I reached for the key to the small safe under the counter. I opened it, handed him the cash. He carefully tucked it into an old canvas bag. Then he looked at me again. An unreadable look. "Anything else?" he asked. I shook my head. He paused, staring at me for a few more seconds, his eyes empty. Then he turned his back with steady, unhurried steps. He walked toward the back door. He didn't close it. He simply stepped out and vanished into the darkness he had created. A moment later, I heard the RV engine roar to life. It didn't drive onto the highway. I heard the tires crunching gravel as it circled the back of the station, heading straight into the desert. I sat there, in my corner, gripping the baseball bat until my knuckles were white. I sat there as the RV's headlights finally faded and winked out. I sat there as the red security light seemed to grow dimmer. I sat there until I saw it, a pale streak of gray on the eastern horizon. Dawn. Only when the first, weak sun touched the store through the mirrored glass did I let go of the bat. It clattered on the floor with a dry sound. When the manager's car pulled up at 7 a.m., he found me huddled behind the counter. "Alex," he said, his voice raspy. "The master breaker was tripped. I tried to call you. I just looked at him." Later, the police found the boot prints in the stockroom. They found deep tire tracks leading into the wasteland, but they never found the beige RV. The security tape, as I suspected, was just static after 3:15 a.m. The money was gone. But I was alive. I quit that day. I left Scorpion Bend and never looked back. The experience left a deep mark on my mind. My car was devouring the last miles of this unfamiliar road. The lights of the small towns along the way had long been extinguished, surrendering the sky to darkness. The night was so thick I felt like I was driving into a velvet tunnel, with only the weak beam of my headlights sweeping across the gaunt branches, reaching out to the roadside like withered fingers. A dry beep sounded. I glanced down at the dashboard. The gas warning light had flared bright red, the fuel needle lying flat on the last mark. A chill ran down my spine. "Come on, don't die on me here," I muttered. And then, like a mirage, it appeared. An old, dilapidated gas station tucked away on the right, almost swallowed by the shadows. The gas sign was rusty, but the 3 letters were still there. Even the light from the few cheap neon bulbs hanging in front of the counter flickered weakly, tiredly battling the gloom. I swerved, the crunch of gravel under the tires jarring in the silence. I hoped I could fill up before plunging into the complete wilderness ahead. The station looked like it had been abandoned for a decade. Not another car. Not a soul. I turned off the engine. The silence immediately descended, thick and heavy, as if it had physical weight. The engine's sudden quiet only made the low hum of a faulty neon light more pronounced. I stepped out of the car. The cold night air carried the scent of damp earth and old gasoline. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely lost. The station's windows were faintly lit, but inside, there was no one. The open sign still hung, but it looked utterly ironic. I pushed the door. A small electronic chime rang, its sound jarringly and strangely out of place. Inside, the air was warmer, but it smelled of burnt coffee and something sickly sweet and unpleasant. I called out louder. "Is anyone here?" "I need gas." No answer. Only the low rumbling sound of the drink cooler. A feeling of unease began to tighten in my stomach. I cautiously approached the checkout counter. The cash register screen was still on, its faint green light illuminating my hand as I lightly tapped the countertop. A few candy bars were scattered. A bag of potato chips was torn open, chips spilling onto the floor. I looked around, trying to find any sign of life. "Hey!" I called again, hoping someone might be in the back room. Nothing. My eyes stopped at the door at the end of the hallway. Cheap plastic sign read restroom. I tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside. "Hello?" I knocked. "Is anyone in there?" Silence was the only reply. A part of me screamed that something terrible was about to happen. But another part, the foolishly curious one, urged me to check. I crouched down. There was a small gap between the bottom of the door and the floor. Holding my breath, I peered through the crack. In the dim light cast from the store, I saw a dark shape lying motionless, or rather a part of it. A dirty athletic shoe in the hem of a pair of jeans. I shivered, backing away. "Hey, are you okay?" Still no sound. My hand trembled as I forcefully twisted the doorknob. Strangely, it wasn't fully locked. The sound of the latch releasing echoed like a gunshot. I pushed the door open. The door scraped loudly against the floor. Inside, beneath a constantly flickering fluorescent light, was the body of the gas station attendant. He wore the blue uniform, the name tag Jake askew on his chest. His body was slumped by the toilet, his face contorted in a final expression of agony. His clothes were stained with blood, but the most horrifying thing was his wide-open eyes, staring into nothingness, as if still seeing the person who had done this. My heart hammered in my chest, a jarring drumbeat. I backed away, hitting the doorframe. The distinctive metallic smell of blood rushed into my nostrils, mixing with the scent of cheap disinfectant. Everything was silent. There was no sign of the killer, no sound, only the stench and a silence so overwhelming it was almost deafening. I fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up. No service. "Damn it," I hissed, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911 despite knowing it was futile. The call wouldn't connect. I ran back to the counter, hoping to find a landline. There it was. I picked up the receiver. No dial tone. The line was dead. Panic began to rise like a tide. I turned, looking around the counter and the empty shelves. The only bottled water I saw was a few bottles knocked over on the floor, the water collecting in small puddles. Time seemed to solidify. I retreated toward the front door, slumping onto a plastic chair next to it, my eyes fixed on the darkness outside. I had to stay calm. Was he still here, or had he left? Every possibility flashed through my mind. The killer could still be around, in the storage room, or worse, outside in the darkness, watching my every move. I glanced at my car. Too far. I turned back, leaning against the wall, trying to breathe. The feeling of being watched clung to me, like a cold fog that could not be shaken off. The next few minutes stretched into what felt like centuries. I started noticing small details. A chair near the counter was overturned. A torn piece of dark fabric was wedged near the exit, as if from a struggle. Faint bloody fingerprints on the doorknob of the storage room. My heart sank into my stomach. The storage room. I realized that the killer's presence might still be somewhere. He could be hiding in there. I backed away from that door, gripping my phone like a useless weapon, ready to scream if necessary. I had to get out of here. I had to get to my car. I glanced at the highway. Pitch black. But then, in the distance, two bright spots appeared. Headlights. I quickly unlocked the door, rushed out, and waved frantically. The car slowed down. It was a large truck, but it didn't stop completely. It only reduced its speed, and then the driver, perhaps seeing the sight of a person waving wildly at a deserted gas station at 3 a.m., hit the gas and sped away, despair. But then, the truck's headlights illuminated something. Another vehicle. A dark pickup truck parked out of sight behind the gas station building, near the trash bins. I didn't dare go back inside the gas station. I ran toward the road, just hoping another car would pass by. And then I heard a siren in the distance. Faint at first, then growing louder. Someone had called the police when the police arrived, their spinning blue and red lights sweeping across my face. I was still standing by the road, my eyes fixed on the gas station. They stepped out, guns drawn. "Sir, what's going on?" An officer asked, his voice stern. "Inside," I stammered. "The restroom." The attendant. "He's dead." They went in, checking every room. I heard them calling on their radios. They found the pickup truck, but when they checked, it was empty. I couldn't take my eyes off the body as they brought him out. The smell of blood and that deadly silence still clung to me, drowning out all other thoughts. I realized that the fear came not just from physical danger, but from the feeling of absolute helplessness and solitude. No screams, no struggle, just the deadly quiet. After taking my statement, the police let me go, my gas tank still empty. A kind officer gave me a small can of gas, enough to get to the next town. I drove on. The road was still dark and long, but the silence was no longer the same. Now it was riddled with threats. The next day I returned to the place. The gas station was sealed off with yellow crime scene tape. The police were still working, but the desolation remained. In the daylight, it looked even worse. I walked around, looking into the windows, the empty shelves, imagining exactly what had happened. I never found out if they caught him. That incident left a mark on my mind longer than any physical wound. Every time I pass a deserted gas station at midnight, my heart still flinches. They are not just places to refuel, but a reminder that everything can change in an instant. The silence, I realized, can be so heavy it can swallow reason itself. And though I am alive, I know a part of me remains in that gas station. I never forget that night, even though many years have passed. I was on the road from Salt Lake City to Reno, driving my old silver pickup truck alone. It was very late. The clock on the dashboard was nearing 2 a.m. when I felt too tired to continue. I looked for a place to stop and rest briefly. Along that stretch of road, there were no hotels or motels open. The only light I saw was the faint sign of a closed gas station, situated by the deserted highway. I decided to park in the lot, right under the weathered sign that read "Gas and Go." The silence was so profound I could clearly hear the wind sweeping through the rusty metal sheets. The parking lot was empty, except for a few rusted pump stands and a dust-covered small truck parked in the distance. I leaned my seat back, locked the doors, and tried to catch a few hours of sleep. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, the clock showed 3:47 a.m. My throat felt dry and my head felt heavy, as if someone was pressing it down. I reached for my water bottle and took a sip. As my eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, I noticed weak headlights approaching from afar. A black car, which looked like an SUV, quietly turned into the parking lot. I looked through the windshield, thinking perhaps someone else was stopping to rest too. But the car didn't turn off its engine. Right after it stopped, the rear door opened, and two people stepped out. They wore dark jackets and baseball caps pulled low. One person opened the trunk while the other looked around, as if keeping watch. I held my breath, leaning low in my seat. The light from the headlights cast onto the pavement, enough for me to see them pulling something out. A long object wrapped in a gray plastic tarp, about the size of a human body. They carried it cautiously, heads tilted to one side as if afraid to reveal it. They didn't speak, only exchanged glances and moved slowly. I felt my heart pounding violently. The scene could not be misinterpreted. I wanted to believe it was a bag of goods, a large animal, anything other than what I was thinking. But when the second person pulled the tarp higher, a pale hand flopped out. I froze. My breath seemed to stop in my chest. I lowered my head, gently pulling down the sun visor to block my view. The fear paralyzed me. They carried the object to another sedan, parked not far from me, about 10 meters in front of my truck's nose. One person opened the sedan's trunk, the other signaled. Together, they lifted the tarp and stuffed it inside. The trunk was small, so they had to press hard a few times to get it closed. A moment later, a third person appeared. I don't know from where. He walked from the direction of the old convenience store, which might still have been connected to the gas station area. He said something quietly to the other two, his voice low and urgent. One pointed toward the highway, the other shook his head. Then they stood silent for a moment, as if having a wordless argument. I tried to stay calm. I knew if they saw any light from inside my car, even a small reflection, I would be in trouble. I turned off the clock display, lowered my head further, and held my breath. They started to move away. The SUV turned around and left the lot. The sedan remained there, its engine softly idling. One of the three walked around, as if checking the surroundings. He held a small flashlight, sweeping the light across each vehicle. My throat felt parched. That light swept past my spot, then stopped. I saw the faint beam shining onto the windshield, moving slowly as if he was peering in to see if anyone was inside. I closed my eyes, not daring to move. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed. I heard footsteps moving away, then silence. I cautiously opened my eyes. He had turned away, returning near the sedan. I couldn't clearly see his face, but his gait was stiff, hurried, and the flashlight beam swung restlessly. They talked for a few more minutes. Afterward, the sedan drove away, leaving the parking lot empty. I remained still, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. I didn't dare start the engine. If they were still around, the sound could give me away. I waited longer. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, until I was certain the area was completely silent. I opened my phone. No signal. This area was between 2 mountain ranges, and the gas station had been abandoned for a long time. I only had one choice: leave here as soon as possible. I started the car, turned off the headlights using only the weak running lights. The wheels rolled slowly over the gravel surface. As I passed the spot where the sedan had been parked, I saw a dark smear on the concrete. I wasn't sure if it was oil or something else. I drove a few more miles until I caught a signal. I pulled over to the side and called the police. My voice was trembling as I recounted the story, but the dispatcher remained calm. They asked for my location, description, and said they would send someone to check. I hung up and sat silently for a long time. In the morning, a police officer called me back. They confirmed they had gone to the parking lot but found nothing except a few tire tracks. No signs of any criminal activity. I repeated what I had seen, but he only said, "You were probably tired just seeing things." I knew I hadn't been seeing things. I clearly remember that hand. After that day, I never drive long distances at night anymore. But sometimes when I pass a desolate parking lot, headlights shining onto the patchy concrete, the image resurfaces in my mind, the gray tarp, the dangling hands. I no longer drive long distances at night, but occasionally, when I drive past an empty parking lot, headlights casting onto the stained concrete, that image flashes in my mind. The gray tarp, the dangling hands. It's not just a memory. It's a soul wound that haunts me forever.